Nowadays, with Trackmania maps becoming more complex and sophisticated than ever, mappers are using hundreds of different blocks to make their maps. But today, I'll be seeing if that's necessary. I'm challenging myself to build good maps, but each time with fewer and fewer blocks, until the final challenge, 1 block. Let's get into it. Before we start, let's lay out some ground rules. For this challenge, items count as blocks. Before I start mapping on each map, I must decide what blocks I want to use for it. This excludes the start, finish and checkpoint blocks to make it possible at lower blocks. However, I can only use one type of start, finish and checkpoint block in each map. I can use multi-lap blocks instead of the start and finish blocks, but I cannot use custom items. With that said, let's begin. First, the hardest part of the map, choosing the blocks. But before we do that, I need a plan for the map. I decided to go for a grass map. This style of map needs lots of different blocks, so now is my only chance to make it. I was able to create a set of blocks that I think gives me all I need if I'm creative. So for this map I've gone for a flat grass road, a small grass uphill, a small grass downhill, a large grass downhill, grass quarter pipe, banked grass, a small bank grass turn, large bank grass turn, a roadblock, trees, flat grass CP, a flat grass start and a flat grass end. This selection gives me the ability, with some techniques I'll show you later, to create most of the turns that I would need for this style of map. So let's get into the map. On grass maps, gears are important, and gearing up or down on grass in an awkward spot can hurt your run. So I wanted to get the player to gear 4 before they went onto the grass. To do this, I started with the roadblock. And this is where we get to the first trick I'm using, Editor++. Editor++ is a plugin that gives you greater control when making tracks, and, importantly for me, allows me to rotate blocks at any angle I want. With this, I was able to make an interesting start to map rather than just a straight line. By rotating and positioning the roadblock, I was able to use it a lot more. I could make triangles, allowing the player to take a much more natural line in the flat section, and could also angle it to make it act like a bank block. Using this, I could create a start that was long enough for the player to get to gear 4, while also being interesting. Now that the player is at gear 4, we can start the grass section. I pretty quickly found a bank turn going uphill to the next checkpoint that flowed well. However, coming out of this turn, I found that it was really easy for the player to lose their gear. This is because when the player turns sharply they can lose speed, and with the lower speed they'll be carrying out of this turn, dropping the gear down is easy. But I could not just put in a straight line. One of the key rules when making maps, especially in this style, is that the player should always have something to do. This is why you don't see good maps that have long straights or large jumps. So I had to find a turn where the player will be turning for only a short amount of time, so they don't drop the gear, but also give them something to do. To do this, I had to use the roadblock again. The car turns faster on road than on grass, and if the player is sliding when they come onto the road, it will be as if they were drifting. This could allow me to get the player to turn a lot more with minimal inputs, and by rotating the block to the same rotation as the bank grass block, I was able to find a turn that flowed well and preserved the gear, going into uphill and the third checkpoint. After this, I made a turn using the quarter pipe, the last route block I hadn't used yet. As the banking increases as you go up a quarter pipe, with the trajectory the player had, I could use the quarter pipe to push the player towards the right, quickly setting them up for the next turn. I then made another simple bank turn leading into the next checkpoint. After this checkpoint, I made a fairly rudimentary turn where the player uses small uphill blocks to help them turn. At this point, I was nearing my targeted length of the track, but the turn out of the final checkpoint was proving tough. Due to the previous turn being tight, so it would actually be challenging for the player was carrying very low speed into the final turn, and it felt like whatever I made led to a gear down. I tried both grass and tarmac turns, but none of them were producing anything that felt natural while also keeping the gear. Eventually, after spending a long time on this, I was able to find a turn where if the player held right, they'll be able to keep their gear. However, this meant the player had to go into the turn with the correct line, and if they didn't, there was very little room to adjust it midway through, and this was definitely my least favourite part of the track. I then added a small transition from a quarter pipe to a bank turn, which was the first transition since the start of the map. This led onto a wide section of grass before a half loop, which I made by rotating the quarter pipe upside down, and then the finish, which was an upside down finish block. But now with the route finished, it's time to drive the author time. During the hunt I made some small tweaks to the route, but after half an hour I got this run. Now that I have the author run, I headed to the media tracker. I first made a GPS with the author time run, so that players could see the ideal lines. Then turned my focus towards scenery. Going into this map, I had an idea of what scenery I wanted. I didn't have much freedom for my scenery, with 9 of my 10 blocks being used for a route, but I could combine the green from the grass with grey from the support blocks that generate underneath the grass blocks to create a hilly and stony nature feel. I added some colour grading and fog, as well as changing the time of day to morning to create a hazy and foggy feel that would go well with this scenery. Then there was the scenery itself, and this is why I used the second trick of the episode. When you place blocks in block mode, the game creates supports underneath them, and when the block is a grass block, it will create a stone support. What I can then do is delete the support block midway through. This will only delete the block underneath it and keep the rest of it. This allows me to sculpt out natural looking arches, which I can then use for overhead scenery. My 10th block of the map was trees. This will help a lot with scenery, as when the player is driving, they'll rarely be looking down and seeing the grass floor, so from their perspective, most of the scenery will just be the grey supports. By using trees that go vertically up, it allows for a mixing between the green and grey colours. So with this, I got started with the scenery. And with that, all that is left to do is make the thumbnail, and the map is done. This only took me 7 hours, and considering the restrictions, I'm pretty happy with it. Now, this map presents quite a different challenge to the previous map. Unlike the previous map, it is hard to assemble a lineup of 3 blocks that gives you the freedom to build whatever you want. So, I have to go into this map knowing roughly how I want to place my blocks. I was able to come up with a plan for this map. I'll be making a tech map. This is because it's possible to make a large amount of different drifts by just using a small uphill, a small downhill, a flat block and a bank block. And by combining some of these drifts together, you can make a flowy track. But I mentioned 4 blocks and can only use 3 blocks for the map, and this is where the third trick of the episode comes in. When you place uphill or downhill blocks in ghost mode, the underneath of the block will be flat, so if we flip these blocks upside down, we can drive on this flat part, and this flat part drives the exact same as driving on a normal flat block, so we can use upside down uphills and downhills as if they were flat blocks. It is also possible to rotate these substitute flat blocks so that they are at the same angle as bank blocks would be. This drives the exact same, and we can substitute the bank blocks out for upside down rotated uphills or downhills. So by just having a small uphill and downhill, we can rotate them to act as if we had 4 blocks instead of 2. So I'll be using the small uphill and the small downhill blocks for the map. This leaves me with 1 block left. The 2 blocks I've already picked for the map don't give me much freedom when making scenery, so I decided to choose the final block as something that will help with scenery, and I went for the large cube item for my final block. For the start block, I picked a normal tarmac start, and for the finish and checkpoints, I picked a small finish item and a small checkpoint item. So let's get into the map. I made a similar start to the 10 block map, as a player needs to gain speed before they are fast enough to drift. I used the substitute flat blocks the same way I used the normal flat blocks in the previous map, as I rotated them to create triangles. This led to a small transition and to the first checkpoint. As I used a small checkpoint item, I needed to place multiple checkpoints to cover the road. I then linked these CPs together so they act like one checkpoint. I decided to do this instead of using a larger checkpoint item, as I could vary the shape and size of the checkpoints. By placing the small items differently or changing the number I use, I can make different checkpoints. This then led on to the first drift of the map. It is quite a low speed drift, with the player doing it whilst they're in gear 3 rather than in gear 4, which is a gear they'll have for all the other drifts in the map. As I had not built the exit of the drift when I tested it, the car would jump out of the road. However, when I did this, the car jumped back to the start block, and it was actually a really flow transition, so I decided to keep it. I extended the start platform by placing a substitute flat block which overlapped with the start block. This made the jump a bit easier. Then I made a jump going to the next section. One unintended side effect was that, as the ramp was connected to the start, it was possible for the player to get checkpoint 1, turn around and attempt the jump. I didn't know if this jump was possible or if it saved time, but just to be on the safe side, I added another checkpoint to the end of the first drift. I then focused on the next section. As the jump was quite a long one, I didn't want the player to land on a straight, so I did a turn they would take immediately after they land. This then led to the second drift, and the first drift that required the substitute banked blocks. However, making this was quite annoying. Whilst driving on a banked block and a substitute banked block was the same, they are not actually the same block, as they are different lengths. This made it hard for me to create an exact replica of the turn I would have made if I'd used actual banked blocks. But after a bit of time, I was able to make a turn that drove nearly the same, and, importantly for me, flowed well. This then led to another drift, which was much easier to make as it only used the uphills and flats. But when I made the final drift, I had to use the substitute bank blocks again, which meant I had to do more fiddling with them. In this turn, I had to rotate one of the downhill blocks, as there's a small gap in the connection between it and the uphill. This meant that the player would transition cleanly if they were on the racing line, but if they were not, they could catch a bit of airtime, which was annoying, but there's not much I can do about it. And this leads us to my favourite part of the map, the end. I was messing around with a roof hit, not expecting to find anything I would actually use, but then I found this. When you guess it, it feels super clean, and I had to keep it, despite the track being a bit shorter than I wanted it to be. However, this flip did not work 100% of the time. Luckily, the way the landing was designed, if you didn't flip or only got half a flip, you'd still be able to finish the map with only a small time loss. But I had to make a safe finish for the players who did not have the speed to go for it. And with that, the route is done. Before I move on to scenery, I'm going to drive my orphan run. You may have noticed that rather than using a grass-based map, like I did for the previous map, I used a void-based map, and this is because of the scenery idea I have for this map. With the limited blocks I had for this map, before the map I decided to try to make a more liminal style scenery, as I could make this with a smaller block set. The idea for this map scenery was to have pillars stretching all the way from the top to the bottom of the map, in a way that the player would not be able to see either end of them, making it almost feel infinite. I would then add a swirl of cubes around it, creating an almost spacey feel. I started adding pillars to the map, but soon noticed that the player would see the tops or the bottoms of the pillars while playing. I used a 64 cubed base map for this map, so I decided to extend the y-axis. I then moved the track up to halfway, and then added the pillars again. And this achieved the effect of the player not being able to see either the top or the bottom of the pillar. I added some ambience in the media tracker to further enhance the feel, then moved on to the swirls. However, a problem had emerged. Due to the change type, the cube blocks were bugging out and I could not raise them to the height of the track, as they started capping themselves at Y64 while the track was above this. I did find some workarounds. I could still use macro blocks at any heights, and I'd always intended to use macro blocks due to the large number of cubes I'll be adding, so for now this was fine. But there was another, much more annoying problem. When I moved my camera around, if it was above 64 on the y-axis, the camera would snap back down to 64. As I had moved the track up, if I was looking down at the track and changed my camera angle, I'll get snapped down and have to scroll all the way back up, which was very annoying. But for now, I don't have to worry about that, as I could make the first part of the scenery below 64 on the y-axis. Due to the large number of cubes I would be placing, it would take me forever to place them individually, so what I planned on doing instead was making macro blocks. This allowed me to decorate an entire tower with a few macro blocks, rather than possibly thousands of individual items. So I got to work. I made a couple small swirls, a medium swirl and a large swirl. Once I had these macro blocks, I could start placing them around the pillars that I had made. However, there was an issue. The place I had to click to place the macro block was different from where the hole was in the middle, which made it much harder to see exactly where I should place the block. This was combined with the fact that if I was above Y64 and moved my camera around, it would snap back down. This all made it much harder to actually place the macro blocks, and I misplaced them a number of times. If I wanted to check that I'd placed them correctly and I was above Y64, I'd have to scroll all the way up to check it. While I originally planned on making each individual pillar separately using these macro blocks, after making just 2 of them, I'd gone really annoyed and just wanted to finish building. So I selected the entire swirl around one of the pillars, copied it and pasted it onto all the other pillars. This meant that I'd finish this part of the scenery much quicker, but every pillar had the exact same swirl. While this isn't optimal, I doubt anyone will notice while playing the map. I wasn't finished with the scenery yet though. I also wanted to place a bunch of the cube items above the route. I'd done this in a previous track, which was set in space, and it provided the vibe I was looking for. However, as I've previously mentioned, due to me changing the map size, I couldn't actually move the items high enough to place them above the route. So I had to use a workaround. I knew that macro blocks could be placed above Y64, so I made a macro block of just one cube item. I then scrolled up and started placing it. As I was above Y64, I could not move my camera around without being sent down, which was very annoying. After a little while, I'd managed to finish the scenery. As I'd moved the track up, if I watched the GPS, the run would still be on the old Y coordinate and would appear as if I was driving on the air below the track. So I had to drive another GPS run, which ended up being slower than my original run, and added it as a GPS. I then did the final touches. I made an intro and got a cool screenshot for the thumbnail, and with that, the 3-block track is done. Now, it's time for the hardest map of the episode, the 1-block map. The block I choose will need to be a versatile one with many uses. I decided to go for a quarter pipe block. This is due to 3 reasons. Firstly, I can use the block as usual, which can provide a lot of turn and jump opportunities. Secondly, I can flip it upside down to create a flat block, and use this block just like a normal flat block, and make triangles or bank blocks with it. But what really makes it special is that if you rotate it to its side, you'll be driving on its wooden walls which have the wood surface, allowing me to have multiple surfaces in this map. I decided that, we were already being hard to map with just 1 block. Rather than trying to make a certain style of map, I'll just go turn by turn and see how it turns out. I started with a Trackmania turbo start, which is the start most commonly associated with the quarter pipe block. This then led onto the first wood section of the map. I made a couple simple flat wood turns, leading back onto the flat road. Due to the angle the player is coming at into this, they'll be sliding when they go onto the road, and they can change their drift angle by braking. This meant that I could make the next turn a bit sharper than what they'll be able to do with the slide they had coming onto the flat road, meaning there would be a drift. I tested it and it flowed really well. However, as I continued mapping, it started to appear as if that flowy start was a bit of a fluke. I'd spend the following hour trying to find something that flowed well and was consistent, only for the issues with this route to become too large and hard for me to solve, leading to me just deleting the entire route all the way back to checkpoint 1. What's worse is that this happened twice. I was eventually able to find a flat drift that flowed decently well out of this turn. However, it was very hard to do if you're off the racing line, and was easy to fail at. This was then followed up by a big quarter pipe jump to the next section and second checkpoint. It was quite a long jump and getting the car to land early was hard, but it was fun to do. I then added a wood turn into another quarter pipe. I originally wanted to get the player to jump from this quarter pipe to another quarter pipe and continue from there. However, due to the speed the player was carrying and the speed difference that would originate from a previous quarter pipe jump, I went for something else. What I did instead was place a row of checkpoints close to the peak of the jump, so that the player would jump up to collect them and then come back down. This also meant the player would do a 180 mid-air, so they'd be facing the right direction for when they landed. This jump was cool, however, if the player was not carrying enough speed into the jump, they would fail it. It was also very easy to mess up the angle, causing you to jump too far out to the side, and the worst thing about the jump was the landing. The landing was not super smooth, causing the player to lose a bit of speed when they came back down. As with all quarter pipe jumps, you have to have the right angle when landing to get the best exit, but due to the player doing a 180, it was very easy to over-rotate it and be pointing slightly to the left when you landed, causing you to lose a lot of speed. But it was the best that I could find, and so I kept it and moved on. I made another simple wooden tarmac section, leading into the final quarter pipe of the map. This is my favourite quarter pipe from the map, with the jump height being just right for the players to have enough space to release to try and get the quickest landing possible, while also being challenging and tough to overjump. However, due to the variety of angles that the player could have from the previous quarter pipe, you would not always have the correct angle to make the jump. This jump led you to a half pipe, where you'd finish at the left corner into a square finish I made using small finish items. The map ended up being longer than I expected it to be, with a good run getting a high 37. This is longer than the previous track and only a second shorter than the 10 block map. Now that I've completed the route, it's time to drive the author run. It would be very hard to make scenery with just a quarter pipe block, so before I started the map, I decided that I would just not make scenery, as it would inevitably look ugly. I did try to make the track look a bit better, by changing the colour of the blocks and adding some ambience in the media tracker. I then made a thumbnail for the map, and with that, the map is done. And with that, I've completed all the maps. Before we finish, I'm going to rank all the maps I've made in the tier list. For the 10 block map, I'll put this in the B tier. The route was flowy and I did like the scenery with the whole nature vibe. However, after calculating the shadows, the track was a bit dark. And it's also pretty hard to keep the gear in your first few runs. I'll put the 3 block map in B tier as well. It's got a decent route and I ended up liking the scenery in the end. However, there are plenty of problems with the route and some parts are very easy to crash at. Also, I didn't really have much fun making this map. And for the 1 block map, I'll put this in D tier. The first 10 seconds were great, and if the rest of the map was at this quality, it'd probably be A or even S tier. However, the rest of the route kind of sucks, especially the quarter pipe jump where you jump up to collect the checkpoint, and I did not have much fun hunting the AT. Also, there's no scenery to this map. If you want to play these maps yourself, I've linked the Trackmania exchange link in the description. And if you like this video, feel free to subscribe or join my Discord server to see when I next upload. And with that, I'll see you later. Bye!